Hey everyone, it is Stove here and welcome back to another video. This time we are not only going to be doing a review of the first round of the college football playoff bracket, but we are going to do a preview on the second round. So let's go ahead and go through that. Obviously, James Madison losing against Oregon. James Madison really didn't score too much in that first half. Oregon mainly did all the scoring. I believe it was like 20 something or maybe even 31 points to like 3 during halftime, and then once they got into second half, James Madison was able to score, but at the same time I'm pretty sure Oregon put up their second, third strings to be able to just mess around, and that's basically where James Madison was able to score most of their points, was that second half. But Oregon pretty much was like, no, we're going to end up scoring even more points in that second half as well. So pretty much in the second half, James Madison was able to match him tit for tat whenever it came to points, but with Oregon had already scored as many points as they did in the first half, it was pretty self-explanatory what was going to happen. Now we get into Alabama versus Oklahoma. Very good defense by Alabama, taking care of a lot of different things. At first, Alabama was a little wonky, but obviously so was Oklahoma. Now Oklahoma did end up scoring 17 points first, and then Alabama proceeded to not only get the ball turned over, but start to even stop Oklahoma on third downs, which was spectacular for them and was good defensive morale for them every single time that they did it. Not only that, but Alabama's defense even went in and got a pick six, I believe, in the first half to be able to tie it 17-17 by halftime, then proceed to also work their defense, making that quarterback at Oklahoma struggle, get pressured as much as possible. And they continue to do this consistently throughout the entire game, which is exactly what they needed. Ty Simpson, obviously, he put out a decent show. It wasn't like the greatest performance, but it was still a decent performance. The defense, like I said, did phenomenal. Oklahoma did phenomenal for the most part in that like a quarter and a half, until Alabama started doing what they were doing. Once they had that first spark and getting a turnover, and then getting stopping Oklahoma on third downs, making them punt, these were little sparks that created the bonfire that we saw Alabama pull off against Oklahoma, who had beat them almost a month ago with kind of a similar strategy with what Oklahoma was trying to do. And at the same time, Alabama, when they did turn the ball over, they were positioned well. Yes, they also had punted quite a few times this game as well, but their turnovers caused them to have good positioning on the football field, and that's where they started getting touchdowns. They got the ball at like the 35-45 yard line on the other team's side. Sometimes I believe it was even closer than that, but they've even had longer drives than that, where because of punts they started at their 15, 25, 30, and they proceeded to be able to march down the field, whether it was to get a field goal or to get a few solid touchdowns. At the same time, though, Oklahoma's kicker, I believe, did miss 2 field goals, if I'm not mistaken. So those 2 field goals could have made the game a hell of a lot closer, being 34-30, or could have spun Oklahoma around with their morale if they weren't missing those kicks. But regardless, Alabama did end up coming up with the win. Huge defensive plays by Alabama. Incredible historical comeback for them in this new college playoff format. One of the best games that we saw this entire past weekend for college football. Now you also had Ole Miss versus Tulane. Ole Miss pretty much wiped the floor with Tulane. Again, In my opinion, I felt like Tulane had a little bit more spunk, but it seemed like James Madison was the one that came in with more spunk and more drive to be able to, and more opportunity to be able to score in the second half, where Tulane pretty much only really scored twice, one field goal and one touchdown in the second half. Ole Miss, however, pretty much took control early, scoring a good amount in that first quarter and the second quarter, and then they scored a few bits here and there, third and fourth quarter. Again, Ole Miss was able to control the game, and Tulane, for whatever reason, obviously you could name a lot of different reasons, but for all the reasons that there are, Ole Miss was just simply better than Tulane. And Ole Miss was able to get that W, and now they face Georgia on January 1st. Miami versus Texas A&M. Some people may have thought that this was like kind of a sleeper. In my opinion, there was just a lot of defensive plays. I get very excited whether it's a defensive play, offensive play, special teams play. It was great seeing Miami show up and beat Texas A&M. This also causes Texas A&M to get knocked out of the college playoffs bracket, but also get shown that they played phenomenal defense themselves as well. The only thing is they made a few more mistakes than Miami did, and that's what caused them to let a touchdown happen in their end zone. So being 10-3, I still think it's pretty impressive that both teams were able to stick that much through both defenses being able to continuously do more and more things. Now obviously by the second half, defenses started getting tired. Third quarter, you had finally had points on the board, Miami getting a field goal. Fourth quarter, Texas A&M in the middle of that, getting after like 5 or 6 minutes of that, getting a field goal. Then Miami coming right back after, I would say, a couple of back and forths, if I'm not mistaken. Miami finally scores in like the final like 2.5, 3 minutes, and then Texas A&M has the ball, and obviously Miami, I believe, was the ones that kneeled it out. But I'm pretty sure Texas A&M was this close to tying the game up, but with time not being on their side, I believe with last time I looked, it was like 33 seconds or 20-something seconds left to go. It was like third and goal and fourth and goal, trying to get to pass into the end zone and just could not complete the passes, which entail Miami was able to do hella good coverage. I'm sure with some people, a lot of people are probably being like, oh, there was holdings here, there was pass interference here. Well, there's always going to be that, and unfortunately those probably weren't going to be called. Well, if they were, then they weren't going to be called, and unfortunately that's just what happens. But again, solid defense by both teams. Both teams should not be shunned for winning, losing, whatever. I think Texas A&M is still an incredible school, still an incredible football program. But the only thing is, they do something that pretty much, like, again, incredible defense by them. But I do think without being able to finish the last game that they were in, against Texas blowing them out or destroying them pretty much. Then Texas A&M comes in, gets into the college playoffs, and then basically pretty much some of the same mistakes that they had against Texas have against Miami, and Carson Beck is able to throw a passing touchdown into the end zone to cause them to be down by a possession. And does this hurt Texas A&M's pride and confidence going into the offseason? Absolutely, but it shouldn't, because they played their hearts out, and Miami ended up making a few more better plays, simply put. So, with that being said, Miami does move on to go face Ohio State. which could be a very interesting matchup. A lot more interesting than what some people may think, but realistically, this is where we're going to go through. Now we can go ahead and preview the next 4 games that we have going through this. January 1st, there will be 3 games. The Capital One Orange Bowl, Oregon versus Texas Tech. Rose Bowl, Alabama versus Indiana, which I think this side of the bracket right here is a hell of a lot more tough, in my opinion. A lot of people just think, well, because Oregon was able to score so much, they're going to do the same exact thing to Texas Tech. Texas Tech is on a completely different level than what James Madison is. Arguably, they are on the same level as Oregon. Arguably. Their defense is going to save the game completely. Same with Alabama. If Alabama's defense causes turnovers, puts them into better field positioning for their offense, whether or not they get good field positioning, plays well, gets the run game going, they will beat Indiana. Texas Tech defense rolls, does not allow Oregon to score more than 28 points, then they will end up winning, because I believe Texas Tech is able to score more than 28 points on Oregon. As long as they're able to do that, there should not be a problem. They give just a hair of a favorite, 1.5 favorite to Oregon. With Alabama versus Indiana, I think they're disrespecting Alabama quite a bit with a 7-point favorite going to Indiana. And then we have the third one that I was about ready to talk about, the All-State Sugar Bowl, Ole Miss versus Georgia, which I do think it's a little bit more fair to say that Georgia has a 7-point favorite compared to Alabama and Indiana having that 7-point favorite. I only say this because Alabama is better than Ole Miss. I believe that Georgia is way better than Ole Miss. The only team to beat Georgia this year is Alabama. Now, granted, they beat the crap out of Alabama in the conference championship, but whether that be because there was a lot of players on the bench, a lot of starters on the bench or on injury report, or there was just a lot of mistakes happening, it does not matter. They ended up beating them. A win is a win. So, with that being said, Alabama is just lucky that they're not really having to face any of their SEC teams besides Oklahoma. Now, not saying that Indiana isn't going to be a challenge for them. They will be. Indiana's defense shows up like how they were able to show up against Ohio State. It will be a bar burner whenever it comes to defense. Whoever's defense shows up in these 2 games, even if it's just these 2, even if it's just that both defenses show up with Alabama and Indiana, you're going to have at least like one of these 2 has to have either a better passing game or a better run game than the other. And I think Indiana is going to have a better run game. Will they have a better pass game? It's really up to Alabama's offensive line keeping Ty Simpson from getting pressured as much. Arguably, Indiana has one of the best offensive lines in the nation because of the way that they were able to keep pressure off of Mendoza during the Ohio State game, and Ohio State is arguably in the top 3 best defenses in the entire nation. So, obviously I'm just kind of rambling because I'm going back and forth with games, but our last one is the Goodyear Cotton Bowl Classic, Miami versus Ohio State. This can be a solid game. Their defense, Miami's defense showed up throughout that entire game, and I give them credit. They held Texas A&M to 3 points. I feel like that should, regardless of how we think about Texas A&M right now compared to how we felt about them like 3 to 4 weeks ago, I think they are pretty much the same team. It's just they had made mistakes, whether it be mental errors or whether it causes them, or these mental errors cause them to have physical errors on the field. So, Miami took advantage of it just like Texas took advantage of it. Miami moves on, they face Ohio State. Miami's defense is not something to sneeze at all. I think their defensive line, their linebackers, have the ability to pressure Jaden Sayin the way that they need to. However, offensive line-wise, it will be tough for them to get past those absolute studs all across the board. Even some of their bench guys are absolute crazy 4 or 5-star studs. So it's gonna, like I said, it's gonna be tough. I'm not gonna be surprised though if I see Miami being able to do certain things, like be able to get to Sayin in the backfield, being able to get some tackles for loss when Ohio State's trying to run the ball. But that's also going to be tough when you have Bo Jackson and a couple of these other running backs in the backfield that are doing what they're doing. So I do feel like Ohio State's going to show a lot more of their running game than their passing game. Even when the D-line and linebackers of Miami seem to be doing pretty well. But Carson Beck was also having struggles against Texas A&M's defense. Not saying that Texas A&M's defense isn't good or is worse than Ohio State. I'm just saying, to me, I think Ohio State is just has the better defense whenever it comes to facing teams. Whether you want to continue to always compare the conferences that Texas A&M and Ohio State are in, all in all, Ohio State has shown a lot more consistency. Just a little bit more though. The last 2 games, they've shown more consistency whenever they've played the last 2 games than what Texas has played just in the last 2 games. And obviously, we go off of the whole season. There's arguable things that Ohio State could have done better still, even though they won every single one of their games besides the conference championship game that they were in. But I do believe Ohio State gets that win against Miami. I think if Carson Beck is having trouble with Texas A&M's defense, he will more than likely also have trouble with Ohio State's defense. He finds a chink in their armor. The run game is kind of there to put some pressure off of him. Then I do see Carson Beck throwing 2 touchdowns. But I really don't see them scoring more than 20 points this game. And Ohio State ends up winning probably 34-20. Well, 34-20 or 34-37-17, realistically. That's just me. Now, could it be a lot closer? Absolutely, there could be a lot of things that may happen in this game, and it could end up being a 27-24 and Ohio State wins by 3. It could be something like that, which in that case, then we're like, okay, well, Miami either showed up and played like absolute monsters and they still ended up losing, or Ohio State is starting to show there's chinks in their armor, there's weaknesses there, and whoever really the winner between Ole Miss and Georgia going into the Fiesta Bowl will end up being able to solve those things, be able to use those ideas and those chinks in the armor of Ohio State to be able to get past them to go into the national championship January 19th. But realistically, it's going to be an interesting lineup. These 4 matchups are going to be very interesting. We are getting down to the nitty-gritty of some of the best, if not the absolute best, teams in the entire nation. Oregon versus Texas Tech. I believe Texas Tech can win against Oregon. Will I be surprised if Oregon just comes out and surprises everybody? Generally, I think the black horse is either, that's not being talked about as much, is either Oregon or Alabama. Hell, you could even put Ole Miss in there. I just think that right now, unless Miami stuns Ohio State, they're not going to the national championship. I think that's for another day that we can talk about that. But I think I believe Texas Tech wins. I believe Alabama could win against Indiana if their defense comes into play and they protect Ty Simpson. That's really it, because Ty Simpson is a baller when he is not being pressured. Now, even when he is being pressured, there's been times when he's still able to play ball, for sure. But it is necessary for you to protect your quarterback. It is always necessary to do that. And it even helps when you guys get, on average, like 60 to 80 yards of rushing per game, whether it be from your quarterback, your running backs, whatever. Get that going, and I do see Alabama winning 23-20 against Indiana. But I think Indiana's defense will be way too much for Ty Simpson and the Alabama offense, putting Indiana into the Chick-fil-A Bowl against Texas Tech. Then you got Ole Miss versus Georgia. I think Ole Miss was able to do a lot of things during that Tulane matchup, but it is Tulane. Tulane does not have what Ole Miss has right now. Whether it was because of Lane Kiffin of their recruiting class, whether it was because of other things, that Ole Miss team was able to perform. Do they perform as well against Georgia? That's going to be tight. I think Georgia ends up squeezing it out themselves with a touchdown or two, at least by 2 possessions. But Ole Miss, as long as they don't make more than 5 serious mistakes and they capitalize and make Georgia have these more than 5 mistakes, and I'm saying this because I'm saying as long as Ole Miss doesn't turn the ball over, as long as Ole Miss does not have critical errors during a 3rd down and cost them the entire quarter pretty much, because Georgia can run down that clock if they really wanted to. It's against another solid SEC team, but Georgia could go from the 5 or 10 yard line and more than likely drive that ball for 7 whole minutes if they really want it. 7 to 8 whole minutes, which takes a lot out of a defense such as Ole Miss. It takes a lot out of any of these defenses. The only problem is now you also have a very fresh Georgia defense, and is that Georgia offense willing to go back onto that field 2.5-3 minutes later whenever they hopefully get the ball back? That's another thing, which we've seen quite a lot of that through Georgia's time against the 2 games against Alabama, the other teams that they faced in their conference play-ins, and same with Ole Miss. But again, I do believe Georgia knocks out Ole Miss by more than 2 possessions. But it would be interesting to see if Ole Miss can make it a game, truly. Then, obviously, you have Ohio State versus Miami, who play on New Year's Eve at 7:30. By the time this game is done, it will be more than likely an hour and a half, maybe even an hour before the ball drops in New York and fireworks start going off everywhere across the nation. Not just because of Ohio State's win, but definitely because of us celebrating a new year. So with that being said, I do believe Ohio State wins against Miami, hands down, and it will just be a very good morale boost going into the Fiesta Bowl between facing the winner between Georgia and Ole Miss. Which, honestly, if we look at it, if I'm thinking that the winners actually do come to fruition, these winners that I've already picked go into these bowl games. You have Ohio State versus Georgia, number 2 versus number 3. You have Indiana versus Texas Tech, which realistically, Indiana could easily win that game, depending on what happens with their offense and defense, obviously. So these that would just be a stacked thing. Even if Indiana and Oregon go up against each other, and then you got Georgia versus Ohio State, then at that point in the semifinals, a lot of people are thinking, man, like a lot of these SEC teams were able to get put into these playoff spots, but here they are either losing against each other or losing against teams that aren't SEC teams, and either losing in the first or second round of the playoffs. And then you also see possibly 3 Big Ten teams in Oregon, Indiana, and Ohio State in the semifinals playing for a national championship. Or I would say playing for another bowl game, but also going for a national championship. Now, granted, you can say that, oh, these matchups were made for this. Like, this is what they're trying to do. And you know what? I'm sure there's a lot of different things that you can say. You can be like, well, if it was the case, then you would have had Tulane and James Madison would have never been in there. You would have had Notre Dame and Texas, which Texas is another SEC team, going into there, and then you would have had Texas facing either Ole Miss or Oregon, depending on how you would want to shape that lineup. But, I mean, and all this could be true. All this can absolutely be true, and if they are going to try and fix certain things, they should definitely fix this stuff during the offseason, and we will probably see a lot more things happen during this offseason. Like I said, keep your eye on the Pac-12, because I believe it was either June 1st or July 1st, we're going to see a lot of different Mountain West teams actually shift over to the Pac-12, and I believe another team from another conference shifting over to the Pac-12, giving the Pac-12 an eligible 8 teams to keep the conference keep the conference of Pac-12 alive. Anyway, obviously I said a lot of stuff, a lot of rambling, but hopefully you guys were able to follow that. And with all that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed, and leave a comment down below. Let me know what you guys think of my predictions and my winners. And let me know what you guys think. I could comment down below on your stuff, and yeah, like, subscribe, again, comment, and I can either get back to you, or I can read some of your comments while I'm recording, and even add a couple of comments into the video. So again, all that being said, you guys have a fantastic day, and peace.